What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero? Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, July 4th, 2018. Happy Independence Day. And we have got a lot of stuff to be talking about today. We're going to talk about Independence Day itself right here at the top of the show here. But the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And because it is a holiday, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 today. Just to help fill in and give me a chance to kind of kick back into vacation mode here. So let's get on into it. Again, today is the, I think it's the 242nd birthday of the United States of America. And for a lot of people, it's about, getting on out. It's the fireworks, sporting events, a day off. Post office is closed, bank is closed. And it seems that actually thinking about what Independence Day really means has kind of faded away. And I think that is by design. And you need to go back and realize the tremendous sacrifices the people who signed the Declaration of Independence went through. It wasn't just words on that sheet of hemp paper. A lot of the signers of the Declaration suffered greatly during and after the Revolution. 5 of the signers were captured by the British as traitors and tortured before they died. 12 had their homes ransacked and burned. 2 lost their sons serving in the Revolutionary Army. Another had 2 sons captured. 9 of the 56 fought and died from wounds or hardships of the Revolutionary War. They weren't just kidding when they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to the cause of freedom. Now, 24 of the signers were lawyers and jurists, 11 were merchants, 9 were farmers, and large plantation owners. 1 was a doctor, my ancestor. And John Hancock, of course, sold insurance. But they signed the Declaration of Independence knowing that if they lost the revolution, they would be hanged as traitors. So many of them had their homes burned, and it was a huge amount of suffering. But they were willing to pay that price to have that freedom, to get away from a predatory private central bank. If you remember reading Ben Franklin, he says one of the major causes of the American Revolution was King George III's Currency Act, which ordered the colonies to abandon their own honest monetary system and conduct business with banknotes borrowed at interest from the Bank of England. And the reason they don't teach that in the schools anymore is we're now back under that same system as of a little more than 100 years ago. We're back in that same banker slavery. And as we celebrate our freedom, there are reasons to understand we're not really all that free anymore. Freedom means, you do what you want as long as you're not hurting somebody else. These days, you have to get government permission for pretty much everything. If you're working, you have to have work permits for minors. You have to have licenses for all kinds of professions, hairdressers and so forth. Special permits if you're handling food. The list goes on and on. And those permits are not handed out for free. It's another moneymaker for the government. If you're going to travel across this country by interstate bus, the railways, the airways, you have to show an ID. You have to prove who you are to the government. You have to get a license from the state to get married. They also come at a price. If you want to hunt or fish your own food, there's a permit for that costs money. Just going on out on a holiday like today, having fun. Going on out with your watercraft, your houseboats, kayaks, jet skis, fishing boats, all of them need a permit, which costs money. And anyone caught without the valid permits can be subjected to fines and even confiscation of their watercraft. You have to have a pass to go into the national park system, which is technically the property of the American people. Those cost money. Now, back in colonial times, Americans complained they were forced to provide room and board to British troops. It made the war less costly for King George III, and it also allowed the placing of British officers in the homes of people whose loyalty was not really trusted. And let me fix something here. Sorry about the interruption. I'm doing too many things here at once. Anyway, so the Quartering Act was to put officers in the homes of Americans whose loyalty was in doubt. To be spied on it was an invasion of privacy and a violation of property rights, rather. And that is why the Constitution and the Bill of Rights forbade not only the quartering of troops, but also included that little provision in the Fifth Amendment that your property cannot be taken for use of the government without fair and just compensation. A little part of the Fifth Amendment our government no longer respects because they're using all of our electronics to take the place of those British officers. We're being spied on all the time using our computers, using our phones, our tablets, our electricity, and we're not being compensated for it. And thanks to Edward Snowden, we know there are at least 3 major spying programs that are collecting the private conversations, internet searches, and movement data of all citizens in the United States all of the time. So we've lost much of the gift that we were given by those founding fathers. And we're being dangerously close to living in a police state. Much like that described by George Orwell in 1984, much like that we lived under back when they signed the Declaration of Independence. Now, a lot of people talk about the Declaration, they talk about the Bill of Rights. A lot of people actually haven't really read them closely. And that makes it really dangerous because in the Common Core curriculum, many of those 10 amendments have been rewritten, supposedly to clarify the language. But in one notorious case, they changed the Second Amendment to say that you have a right to keep and bear arms if you are in a government militia, which is absolutely not what the Second Amendment says. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates rejoining the network. We're celebrating July 4th. We're talking about the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. So let's talk about the First Amendment. And it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Now, I see this one misquoted all the time by religious people who are saying the government is not allowed to pass laws controlling the churches. That's not what it says. It's not saying a law regarding an establishment of religion. It says a law respecting an establishment of religion. In other words, Congress cannot pass a law saying we are granting this one religion special status. In other words, a state religion. That's what's being forbidden. Then the First Amendment goes on to abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, the reason the Founding Fathers did this, they were only a few generations removed from the Catholic versus Protestant problems in Great Britain and how very close it came to tearing apart that country. And the Founding Fathers knew their new country, the United States of America, was still in its infancy. And they didn't want to have any religious wars. And so the way they denied religion from having civil power was to grant equal status to all religions. And religions are not allowed to have civil power. The First Amendment was written to build a wall of separation against the church and the state. And many of the colonists had come to the colonies to escape religious intolerance. And that's why that was put in there. No one religion would receive preferential treatment over any other. There would be no state religion in the new nation. Now, this is probably going to become an issue because we're seeing a lot of these Muslim refugees, both in Europe and the United States, calling for the imposition of Sharia law to become the law of the land. And that will definitely fly in the face of that First Amendment. Now, contrary to what you may have been told, the Founding Fathers themselves weren't all very religious. Thomas Jefferson once said, "I do not find in Orthodox Christianity one redeeming feature." John Adams said, "The government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion." And Thomas Paine had written, "All national institutions of churches, whether Jewish, Christian, or Turkish, appear to me no other than human inventions set up to terrify and enslave mankind and monopolize power and profit." Now, the provision of the First Amendment regarding free speech and free press was intended not to protect lies, but to protect the truth. We've actually had politicians in this day and age say that when they lie on the campaign trail, that's protected speech. No, it isn't. It's a lie. The First Amendment protection for freedom of speech in the press was to protect the truth from those in power for whom truth is a threat. Now, with that right to freedom of speech and freedom of the press does come a responsibility, which unfortunately in the corporate media we have seen fall away. The responsibility to present accurate news to the public. And instead, the corporate media has itself become one of the largest purveyors of myths and legends in our society. Now, let's talk about the Second Amendment. That one reads, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." Now, in the days when this amendment was written, the militia meant every adult able to bear arms. And a lot of people are going to say, well, that's sexist because only the men were allowed guns. No, there wasn't. Do you know during the American Revolution there was actually a woman, Molly Pritchard, who commanded an artillery brigade, artillery platoon rather, ran a cannon, shot at the British here. Now the term regulated was not so much a legal term at that time, but a mechanical one. A regulator is any mechanical device used to make something work better. On a steam engine, that spin ball governor to control the speed is the regulator. Now, a well-regulated militia meant a militia with all the proper equipment needed to do their job better. That meant good weapons with good sights. After all, what use is a militia if they can't hit what they're aiming at? And note that the word used is arms, not just firearms, but arms, meaning every possible weapon that might be used in a military confrontation between the government and the people. Swords, knives, axes, what have you. Now, the Second Amendment is not about target shooting or hunting. At the time, hunting was indispensable for survival in the new nation, especially during the winter when food crops were running low. To deprive the people of their hunting weapons was to condemn them to death by starvation in the winter months. And military commanders of the time viewed hunting weapons as off limits. When Lieutenant Colonel George Monroe surrendered Fort William Henry to Major General Louis Joseph de Montcalm during the French and Indian Wars, the civilian militia serving the British were allowed to take their weapons with them when they left. When the British marched on Concord, triggering the battles of Lexington and Concord and the start of the Revolution, it was to seize a stockpile of military arms, not hunting weapons. The very inclusion of the terms militia, security, and free state, it is clear the Second Amendment is referring to a military purpose here. And the Founding Fathers understood that it was only because the people had been in possession of military arms they were able to resist the economic enslavement of King George III's Currency Act. All right, skipping on down to Amendment 3, and I mentioned this one before. No soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. And again, this was in response to massive public sentiment over the quartering of troops and constantly being spied on. Amendment 4. This one has all but vanished from our current culture. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Now, this amendment was created in response to the British practice of simply random searches of homes, businesses, and persons. We're seeing Robert Mueller do that today, just going anywhere he can, looking for anything he can find. It's not only a violation of the Special Counsel statute, it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. It's part of a campaign of intimidation. Now, throughout the years, the Supreme Court has ruled repeatedly that the term effects refers to all effects. That as new technologies have come along, telegraph, radio, telephone, that the right to privacy applies to them all. And hence, based on that legal precedent, it applies to our computers, our phones, our tablets. But the government is ignoring it. The government has clearly gone rogue. Then we have the Fifth Amendment. Most people think that it's just about a guard against self-incrimination. But there's more in there. Let me read you the actual amendment. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Now, that one is basically saying you have a right to a trial by grand jury followed by trial by jury. The only exceptions are military courts during time of war or during a declaration of a national emergency. Continuing on with the amendment. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. That's the double jeopardy rule. If you have your day in court and the jury finds you innocent, that's it. They can't come back at you. Nor shall anyone be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And here's the last part that I was talking about before. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So, Amendment 6. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him. No secret witnesses. To have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. This is all the stuff you hear in that little speech that police give to somebody who's being arrested because of the Miranda ruling. Amendment 7. It suits at common law where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved. And no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. This was to basically, again, reserve the right of a jury trial to civil lawsuits. Obviously, the Founding Fathers did not understand how much our currency would inflate in the subsequent years. So when we talk about the blueprint for the new America and making a few modifications to the Constitution, I think that $20 figure can be raised. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We've got a caller waiting on the line and the rest of the amendments to go through, and we'll be right back. And Aloha America, welcome back to our show. And we're going to take a break from the amendments to take a phone call from Kathleen in Paris. Aloha, Kathleen. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Michael. I wanted to start with where you left off on your show yesterday about the the city, I think in Mexico, where they kicked out all the politicians and the policemen, and everything is running along just fine.
Yeah, boy, I'll bet you a lot of governments around the world are like worried that that's going to get out.
Yeah, could that catch on? I sure wish it could. And I would like to point out that back some years ago, and I was noticing it mainly because I guess I'm living in Europe, but Belgium went with no government for between 500 and 600 days. So going on, 2 years, they had no government.
Well, they had no national government. They still had the local governments, the city governments and everything. But yeah, everything ran great. Everything absolutely ran great,
Yeah,
just on the local governments.
And when we say local government, are we talking about just something like administration?
Well, we're talking about the people who keep the buses running on time.
Yes, right. We need yes, this kind of administration, but somebody to collect taxes and put us in jail if we don't pay it. This kind of.
Well, if you don't have a lot of government, you don't need a lot of taxes. And I don't think it would be an issue. I think if taxes were reasonably low, when this nation was started, there was no such thing as an income tax. In fact, it was actually banned by the Constitution. There had been an attempt to pass an income tax, I think, right around World War I. The Supreme Court struck it down. The federal budget ran entirely on tariffs, on importers and manufacturers, because it was easier to keep track of them than the individual citizens. So you can make a country run without directly taxing the ordinary people. And that's another idea that I'm sure would be considered dangerous in this day and age.
Yes, in preparation for calling you, I looked this up, and it was in 1862 was the first income tax imposed to support the Civil War.
That's right. It was the Civil War, not World War I.
Civil War. Yeah, Civil War.
Yes.
Well, that's what it says here. I'm reading it. I looked it up. It says in 1862, to support the Civil War, Congress enacted the nation's first income tax law. And then it was eliminated in 1872. And anyway, what we know now is that in 1913, it got snuck back in when the Fed was created.
Yes.
And in 1913, it was made permanent. And yeah, I think it's illegal income tax. They found a way to.
Again, going back to the Constitution, there's no direct non-apportioned taxation allowed. In other words, any taxes collected by the federal government had to be returned to the states in equal amounts. It was a tool for management rather than, it wasn't intended to be a source of wealth for the federal government. And, a lot of people, a lot of pro-tax people, both of them, keep saying that the 16th Amendment repealed that provision of the Constitution, and no, it actually doesn't. The text says nothing about repealing that earlier provision, and the rules of the Constitution are it has to be correct. It can't contradict itself. And then there's the issue about whether the 16th Amendment was actually ratified or not.
Right. But yes, do we need government?
I think we need some government, but look at this example from down in Mexico. Everybody stepped in and volunteered. Somebody's volunteering to catch the dogs. Somebody's volunteering, to have a neighborhood watch and keep an eye on crime. And somebody's volunteering to clean the streets. And so far, it seems to be working. It's certainly working a lot better than what they had before.
Yes. And we've got some things like that in the States. I think it's a guy named Brown has a security business. It's a private thing. That doesn't mean that we can't have some security just because we don't have government police with military.
Well, see, the problem we have with our current government is, after all the money they have taken from the American people, they're not really doing their job. They're not keeping crime down. They're not keeping the borders closed. They're not making sure that our mines and oil platforms are safe. They're not keeping an eye on Wall Street. We're not getting value for money is basically what it comes on down to. And that's a lot of money. Anyway, Kathleen, we got to take another break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And let's get on back to those amendments, those 10 amendments that form the Bill of Rights. And Amendment 8, excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. And this amendment was added in case the two previous amendments failed to protect Americans from politically manipulated courts or investigations, which these days they all seem to be that way. Then we get on to Amendment 9, and not a lot of people know about this one. But it's rather important, especially when we get on back to that issue about having to buy permits for everything from the government here. Amendment 9 says, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. This is one of the most important amendments, and yet one of the most overlooked. This amendment says the American people have additional rights over and above those enumerated here, and that the non-inclusion in the Constitution cannot be used as an argument denying those rights. Now, this amendment was added by the Founding Fathers, who were aware the future would bring changes to the world that they could not predict. Among their own members was Ben Franklin, whose own discoveries and inventions made it clear the world was changing in unpredictable ways. The Ninth Amendment says, you, the American people, need and automatically enjoy additional rights that arise as the nation grows, including the privacy of your personal electronic devices. And that is followed up by Amendment 10. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. In other words, the government is supposed to stay within the lines of the powers allotted to it by the Constitution. Now, they broke out of those lines a very, very long time ago. But that's what it says. These last two amendments, the 9th and 10th Amendments, lock in a system where the federal government is supposed to be limited only to those authorities given to it by the Constitution, but the people are assumed to have additional rights. It's a one-way system. It's biased toward the American people, as well as it should be. All right, let's get into some of the news that's happening here. The Democrats, they're out there screaming and crying. I remember when I was a kid and Democrats were all in favor of free speech, civil liberties, and a stronger America. And now they're marching nationwide demanding the abolishment of all U.S. borders and allowing an unlimited tsunami of illegals to flood the country. They're calling literally for the abolishing of all U.S. prisons and releasing all those violent criminals into the streets of America. Obama actually did that back on, I think it was 2014. And this is the important one. Abolishing all private sector businesses and implementing a centrally planned, government-run fascist economy to control everything. And there's a word for that if you're my age. It's called communism. That's the system they had in the Soviet Union, and it did not work. There were major, major missteps and failings. Lysenkoism was a good example. People weren't allowed to decide for themselves which way they wanted to go. It was all planned centrally. You will follow Lysenkoism. And it led to massive famine and the Soviet Union literally having to buy wheat and corn from the United States. Now, Ron Paul is out with a very interesting article that feeds right into this, all of a sudden, very communist bent we are seeing among the liberal Democrats. And he's saying that really cultural Marxism is just like the former Soviet economic Marxism. They just couldn't disrupt the economy, so they've shifted targets. But the goal is still the same, to basically destroy the culture of the capitalist nations and then use that as an opportunity to basically take them communists. So that's what the Democrats are talking about. They want socialism, pure socialism, communism. Now, the problem with communism is that if you take away somebody's incentive to do a better job, they won't do a better job. And under communism, you're getting paid what you're getting paid, and it doesn't matter how good a job you do or even how bad a job you do. The pay stays the same. There's no incentive to move forward. And as a matter of fact, progress in the Soviet Union was very, very slow compared to other places like the United States. Now, on the other hand, I understand that unbridled capitalism, which is now mutating into imperialism, is a problem because you have too much wealth concentrated in too few hands. So you need a middle ground, which is where people can get richer by hard work and cleverness, but there have to be limits and safety curbs so that they don't acquire so much money they become a threat to the system itself, which is what happened in this country. Now, Trump's EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt is the latest Trump administration official to be harassed by a stranger while eating out in Washington, D.C. This apparently happened last night, where this young woman, Kristen Mink, from Silver Springs, Maryland, came on up and just started harassing him over the state of the environment. And I understand that there are concerns about the environment. I understand that there are concerns that EPA is not doing a good job because of corporate interference. But we have to bring back civility to the dialogue, or we're going to be in real trouble. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Do you really think she cares about the EPA, Mike? you know, I mean, you realize, Mike, do you realize these people that, you know, it's Independence Day, the ones who are going to celebrate the 4th of July tonight by shooting fireworks and drinking, they're communists. They're not individuals. They care about the collective, you know, but they'll celebrate Independence Day with their tribe, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
you know,
I get what you mean here.
You know, so it's like it's sad. They don't like individualism. That's the problem.
They don't like individualism. They don't like nationalism. They don't like borders. They are really pushing as hard as they can for this one planet, one government, one private central bank, where everybody's wandering around so confused about who they are, they don't even know what restroom to use. That's what they're pushing toward.
You know, it's funny. Look at Hillary Clinton, all these other Maxine Waters. How come they're not collectivists with their people that follow them with their money?
Oh, well, they want
individual when it comes to that.
They want us all to be collectivists, but they want to hang on, you know, to their cash. I mean, look at Bernie Sanders. He declared himself a socialist, and he's, you know, got all these houses.
So there's John McCain. He's got a lot of homes, too. It's all a scam. It's a scam. It's about power and money. That's always how it's been throughout the beginning of time of human.
Well, I disagree with you on that. I disagree with you on that. I think that the founding fathers of this nation really had high ideals and ambitions, and they really did try and set up a government that was going to be beneficial to the general population. But they understood that it was going to be very difficult. And even Thomas Jefferson wrote that he expected this daring experiment that he had created to only last 100 years. Because they understood that political power always attracts the very people who shouldn't be allowed to have it. And that corrupting influences always come to work on a government and drive it more and more corrupt until it collapses. But I do think the Founding Fathers did intend to do a good job. It's not like they needed the government as a livelihood. Back then, they weren't paid to be members of Congress. It was a part-time honorarium only. These men all had their own businesses. And they were men of means and education. And they thought things through. They didn't sit there screaming and pointing fingers at each other like the Democrats do.
Hey, Mike, I want to switch gears real quick if I still have time. It's a Zero Hedge article says U.S. versus China. Is it the art of the deal or economic warfare? Now, the article is great, but people need to read the comments section because you can learn a lot from regular people. You know, it's like, you know, if you buy a car from Japan and pay in dollars, that's a fair trade. Now, do you realize, people don't realize, if Japan sells cars to here, to this country, it doesn't mean we have to sell an equal amount back to them. You know, it's just if you buy a car from Japan, you know, you pay in U.S. dollars. That's the sale right there. So this whole thing of fair trade is, we don't make anything anymore. That's what the bottom line is.
Yeah, that's the real problem. Nobody wants our products. You know, what we do make, I mean, countries are turning away from the United States military-industrial complex because what they're making is overpriced junk. They're turning to Russia for weapons that operate much better and don't cost as much. And yeah, that's the big problem with our trade imbalance. We've allowed our manufacturing to decline for 30 years, and nobody wants our GMO agriculture. The United States is really in a huge corner here, and that is why they're literally pushing for a new world war to drag the world back to the Bretton Woods Agreement and force everybody to use the U.S. dollar as a global currency, off of which the U.S. economy would make a huge profit.
Do you know Trump has sent somebody out to Europe to look for a motorcycle manufacturer to bring back here because Harley Davidson, people don't realize the parts of Harley Davidson are made out of the country. They're only assembled here. You know, like the same with Indians leaving. So, I mean, people need to realize that if everybody got paid $35 an hour, that'd be great. But, you know, what about the small businesses? They can't afford to pay $35 an hour. I mean, it's a real mess, Mike, if you think about it.
Well, it all goes back to the fact that, you know, all the wealth is concentrated up at that top 0.1% of our population here. And if it was more evenly distributed, then small businesses, there'd be enough currency in circulation where small businesses could pay $30 an hour. And then the workers would take that money, they'd go to the shopping malls, they'd buy things. And that means the malls would be doing a good business. And the manufacturers and the distribution change and everybody, we're all dying from a lack of liquidity is really what it comes down to. And every time somebody starts screaming about, you know, we've got to lower the minimum wage, and that's not how you revive the economy. It's how you make a fast buck if you're the owner of a business or corporation, but you're not thinking long term.
Yeah, if you lower the wage, people can't consume. It's a basic fact, you know, like, but Mike, do you realize, you know, what we're in now is just like, if you have, like, would they want to make $15 an hour flipping burgers? Well, then they're going to automate because it's it's hard to transfer that. You know what I mean? Like, it's too late. You know, it's hard to change when you're in it's like, you know, the horse has left the barn already. You know,
yeah, it really has. And there's another factor as well, because the high-paying manufacturing jobs and have gone overseas because the prison industrial complex is now running all the call centers. There are no jobs out there for people who are working in these restaurants to move to where they can earn more money. And so working at a hamburger joint is not supposed to be a career path. It's supposed to be your first job where, you start building credibility that you're a good worker, and you get along on the low money until you get a better job. But those better jobs, they're mostly gone.
And how do you fix that? You can't. It's too late. The time to fix it would have been a long time ago. It's just too late to repair. It would take so much to repair what's been damaged, Mike, and I don't think it can be fixed. It's like Humpty Dumpty falling off the wall, and
not unless you're willing, to basically, grab that wealth that's at the top and redistribute it. And of course, the money junkies are never going to allow the politicians to do that. We're going to have to go through a reset and a crash and restart the country all over with a whole new monetary system. And all of the assets denominated in dollars are going to be worthless overnight. And we start putting the money back in at the bottom where it has to be for a surviving economy.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like the system's got to crash in order to fix it. If it doesn't crash, it's going to linger on and on and on, and it's going to be more corrupt. Like Rome or Soviet Union.
I don't think it can last much longer. I mean, they're lying to us about all the economic indicators. We're starting to really see the pressure from this open borders insanity. And we're seeing political infighting breaking out into the open. That's not something governments like the public to see. Government has a vested interest in the public thinking everything is running smoothly, it's all going really well, you don't need to worry. But when you have this hatchet fight going on between Robert Mueller and Donald Trump, Peter Strzok, and all the rest of it, coupled with this Maxine Waters-esque harassment of people in the streets, that's making a lot of Americans wonder if this country is going to be around much longer.
And remember, Maxine Waters and Robert Mueller, they might be partly on the same page, but these are different factions. So, yeah, we are fractionalizing there, and it's dangerous. We're in a dangerous time. I mean, I never seen anything like this. I'm 48 years old, and it's pretty crazy. Like Mike, it's going to be scary what's coming because it's going to get worse with the summer of rage they're quoting now and stuff. I mean, I don't know, but what we saw in Portland could be just the start.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that we're going to have a peaceful 4th of July, but at this point, who knows? Obviously, the people on the extreme left have a mindset where they can't give up. They have to keep pushing. Anyway, Dustin, I'm going to have to let you go. We got to do another commercial break. We have another caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go to the phones to Mike in Alberta. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mr. Rivero, happy Independence Day, first of all. Second of all, I've been a listener since way back in the day when you were making regular appearances on the Alex Jones Show, and you do a great job. Since then, I've gotten my own show over on GCN and had you on a few times. That was a big honor. And I'm calling because I want to discuss the differences in the conception of the United States of America and Canada in contrast. Now, I don't know if this has ever come across your radar, but last year I found this individual. His name is Doug Force, and he's making a documentary movie, should be done in a little while, and it's called The Myth is Canada. Now, this man proves that Canada is absolutely a fake country. Its government is completely fabricated. And we went on about this for 2 hours. Like, basically what happened, the Statute of Westminster was signed in 1931, which released all dominions and colonies, okay? So then, fast forward to the 60s, and an act is passed called the British North America Act in Britain's Parliament, brought over to Canada and enacted as law. So when Canadians are celebrating Canada Day, what they're actually celebrating is a foreign act brought in and subjugating them to the level of a chattel slave to the Crown of England. Now, contrast that to the birth of the United States and you couldn't have a more exact polar opposite.
Yeah, I can see your point there. And of course, anybody familiar with Canada realizes that their cultural links to Great Britain are much stronger than those here in the United States. But then we won the war.
It's a really weird setup. And to tell you another thing here, I don't know anybody that has even a shrapnel of respect for the Queen or the royal family. Like, they're hated out here, especially in Western Canada. You know, they'll show you when Prince Harry lands in Ottawa or something, and there's a crowd of people. I don't know where they're finding them, because I don't know anybody that wants anything to do with this anymore. And it's actually being talked about a lot that the West needs to split off from Canada. And the interesting thing about that, there was a member of Parliament named Walter Cool in the Jasper riding in Alberta. And back when René Lévesque was up screaming from the rooftops about Quebec separating from Canada and becoming its own country, Walter Cool wrote a letter to him saying, you cannot have a divorce where there was no marriage. The whole debate about separating from Canada is a non-starter because there is none to begin with. And he's going to prove this in this new documentary. And there's a book you can download called Ho Canada, Ho Canada, by R. Roger Smith. And he was actually in Parliament. He was a backbencher at the time that this whole deal was signed.
Okay,
and
Mike,
so
Mike,
yeah,
Mike,
okay. Yeah.
I got to put you on hold. We got to take a break here for station identification. Don't hang up. I'm going to come right back to you. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're talking with Mike in Alberta about a new documentary that's coming out, which purports to prove that Canada the nation of Canada does not actually exist. Now, taking the advocate position here, devil's advocate, if you think about it, all governments are artificial constructs. It's not like a voice comes down from the sky and sets up a big domed building and says you are now a government. All governments are basically created from scratch, and then they say, ta-da, we're a government. The next step, of course, is recognition by other governments around the world, which can get really, really tricky. But it sounds to me like what is really being talked about here is the legitimacy of Canada's national government as an institution because of that way that it was set up. Am I correct on that?
Correct in your assumption. What it is to me is kind of the rolling back of a lie. And you're right in what you said about government. I'm a big fan of how the U.S. government formed. I just love that, the story and the spirit, and that needs to be commemorated. That needs to be kept alive in the memories of the people. But this is a different animal altogether. And to be quite honest with you, the name of my show is American Uck Radio. My dad's from Chicago. My mother's from Alberta. I was born in Alberta. And when I reached a certain age, I decided I'm going to be an American. So I hold a U.S. passport that says place of birth, Alberta, Canada, nationality, United States of America. And I zero in on that relationship in a big way, interacting with people on both sides of the 49th parallel. And what I've concluded, Mike, is that Canada is a deception, and it is a foothold for the British Empire, or whoever it might be, in North America. Now, when you grow up in Canada, you grow up being taught that how you are defined as a Canadian is how not American you are. It's like a weird little brother syndrome. That's definitely part of the programming, you know what I mean? And so, but the thing about it is that it's dying. It's dying hard, and we're seeing an erosion of the effectiveness of the propaganda. Let me give you an example. We just had 3 high-profile cases here in Canada where a homeowner shot and either killed or injured a criminal that was on their property doing criminal acts, because that's what criminals do. And all 3 of those, it was expensive, and it was a big fight, but the homeowner got off. Now, at the same time, we're seeing articles come out of the CBC, and, you know, Canada's got that CBC, Britain's got the BBC, Australia got the ABC. You know what I'm saying? It's all the same shit, different
Please
countries.
watch your language. Please watch your language. We have on-air broadcasters we have to be careful about.
You got it, buddy. I apologize for that. But here's the thing. Forever and a day, it's been taught to Canadians that you are not an American, therefore you hate guns, you're smarter, you have a better healthcare system that's killing you and bankrupting you. And they're really smarmy, kind of like a neighbor looking over the fence saying, oh, looks like America's got some old paint cans in the garage and a discipline problem. But I'll tell you what, Canada's got problems too, and they're big. And it's just, I don't know, is what I'm saying resonating with you? Because that is what I'm seeing.
I have to be honest, no, because what you're describing, you know, are cultural differences, and I've never felt that attitude of I'm more Canadian by being less American, because every time I've been to Canada, and I've been to Canada many times, I'm always impressed with how polite everybody is. How clean the place is. And, you know, I'm not getting a sense that Canada is any more of a hoax or less of a hoax than, for example, our own government. And I think when this documentary comes on out, if you could direct me to it, I'd like to see it. But I'm not sensing like a real killer argument in here. Anyway, listen, Mike, I got to let you go. We've got a bunch of calls and I got a bunch of news to get to. And we're going to switch on over to Robert in Phoenix. Aloha, Robert. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, happy 4th of July, Mike. I hope you enjoy the fireworks.
Happy 4th of July. Happy we kicked out the British Day.
Happy we kicked out the British Day. I just wanted to, Canada's so clean because half the time it's covered in snow and there's no place to put any litter. but I just wanted to...
Well, all cities look cleaner in the snow, you know.
In the snow, yeah. I heard Don Bangino's name mentioned correctly the other day on your show, and there was some saying that he was just kind of a mainstream kind of point of view kind of guy, but on his very conservative syndicated show he hosted in February, he did this thing called Obamagate Part 1 and 2, and he's the only person I've ever heard mention that Hillary might be selling top secret information on her private server and collecting the money on her foundation on air.
Really?
I would like you to talk to him, yes.
Okay, well, he knows where to find me. He knows where to find me, and but yeah, it's a legitimate question here, especially looking at how Attorney General Jeff Sessions has just slammed the door on any more investigation into what Imran Awan and his brothers were doing inside that congressional computer system. And they issued a statement there, which we know is absolutely false. They said there was no evidence they'd stolen any government property. Of course there was. That's what got Imran Awan in trouble. A neighbor saw him putting just all these hard drives and other equipment into this trash bin, and it was all labeled property of the U.S. government.
Yeah. Well, I think there's some big information about to come out, like, you know, the attorney or Inspector General Horowitz or whatever his name is. Yes. When he was testifying, he, you know, towards the end of the 5 hours video that I watched, he kind of let it go that they're still doing some investigation. They're not done yet.
Yeah, there's still, well, he's investigating the investigation, and we have other members of Congress who are looking at other aspects like the FISA court warrant based on that bogus dossier. That's coming up this week. And there's going to be a lot of other stuff as well. So, Robert, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining the network. And we're going to take one more phone call. Then we're going to close down because I've got a lot of news, and the Lady Claire's coming up here in less than an hour. Nick in England. Aloha, Nick. Welcome to the show. Thank you for waiting so patiently. And what's on your mind?
Oh, no problem. Nice to talk to you again, Mike. I hope you don't mind a Brit coming on the 4th of July. I hope that's not a problem for you. But what I wanted to talk about was a little bit about the World Cup, the Football World Cup. And I know you Americans, not too interested in it, but of course here in England, we're all completely besotted with it. And there's this jingoism, this outburst of party of nationalism all around the world. And it's so hard for me to, link that up with people saying, oh, we're all Europeans now. It's really extraordinary. But the thing that's amazing is that the sports reporters that are writing about how well the World Cup's going, they all seem to be so genuinely surprised at how wonderful it is and how much fun they're having there and how warming and welcoming the Russian people are and how well organized it is and so on and so forth. And everybody seems to be extraordinarily surprised. Every time you hear these football programs on the radio, they're interviewing fans, everybody's saying the same thing, that it's a wonderful event, and they couldn't believe it, because there was so much negativity beforehand about how dreadful.
Yeah, but that was all Russia-bashing propaganda. They tried to do the same thing for the Sochi Olympics. Oh, it's going to be terrible. You don't want to go. Trying to, again, make it look like it was going to be terrible. And now it's backflashing because everybody who went to the World Cup is now saying, wow, that was really a wonderful time. And Russia's actually going to win the PR battle out of this.
Oh, I think so. Because there are so many people there from all over the world, and they're all having the same experience. It's quite extraordinary. I read one sports reporter who I have a lot of respect for in terms of his sports writing, was saying how Russia's involved in a month-long PR exercise, and it helps. It's trying to have its perceptions in the West altered as part of its foreign policy, so that it can manipulate perceptions around Crimea annexation and atrocities in Syria and, the Skripal nonsense. But it doesn't carry any conviction, the way that this sort of thing is being reported. And the one thing that I think is so extraordinary, I read somewhere, just in one newspaper article, I haven't seen it anywhere else, but apparently, the British government, there's an embargo that top politicians and top royalty are not allowed to go and cheer on the England team. And
I guess Boris Johnson is getting a backlash on that one too.
Yeah, but the draw is opening up, and we're all getting very, very excited that with a bit of luck, we may even get to the final. And I'd obviously love it because I'm English and I've supported English football teams since I was a kid. But if we went to the final and the likes of Prince William, who is the president of the FA, he's always turning up for the FA Cup final to present the trophy. He loves football. And the Prime Minister, in the last World Cup final, Angela Merkel, of course she went and was in Brazil. But Germany were in the final, so of course Merkel has to go. It would be utterly ridiculous if Theresa May didn't go or a top member of the royal family didn't go. And if they did, they would just have to eat a whole load of humble pie. So the sort of mischievous part of me, well, I want England to get to the World Cup final because I'm an England football fan. But the mischievous part of me would just love it because it would make our establishment look ridiculous. I don't think that they, apparently there's an embargo. No top people are allowed to go. Because it's the Russians, the bogeyman.
Yeah,
it's not looking good. It really is. And I honestly think that in terms of selling a war down the line, that this World Cup is going to make it a lot more difficult. It's just a gut feeling I have.
Yeah, I think it really will. But I got to tell you, as a general rule, I understand there's always going to be politics in life, but we have reached a stage where now politics controls everything, and that too is something that we saw in the Soviet Union just prior to its collapse, where everything is politicized, everything is turned to attack your enemies, and especially for these sporting events, I think that'll leave them alone, because they're just there for people to have fun. They're there for the athletes to try and compete and win. I don't like all this talk about boycotting Olympics or trying to sabotage the teams, with bogus doping charges. It really is ridiculous. More than that, it's childish. And I understand there are always going to be politics in the world, but I'd sure like it to be shoved over into this corner over here so that the rest of us can get on with our lives without being told that we're politically incorrect for this or that.
I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, absolutely. I think that this World Cup has been a huge success for Russia, and I'm delighted about it. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you've read, but there's a very, very strange little thing going on near Salisbury in Wiltshire, where apparently people may have touched the poisons that the Skripals had, and they're shutting various places off, and
well, actually, I read the article, and there was an update saying that they died from a recreational drug overdose.
Okay. Oh, maybe it's maybe the media jumped on it.
Blame the Russia. Blame the Russia. Blame the Russia. Blame the Russia. They OD'd. Well, maybe they OD'd after touching the Skripals poisoning. I mean, they're so desperate to push the propaganda. They're only just making it more obvious. That's what they're doing. Anyway, Nick, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. And the only reason I'm not following the World Cup match is I'm not a big sports fan in general. And when I was in college, my sports were archery and fencing. But other than that, I don't like going and watching other people have fun. And I think that goes back to high school, where I was a photographer on the school newspaper covering the football games, and I got tackled and my camera got wrecked, and I've sort of kind of toned down going to American-style football ever since. All right, so getting on back to the news here. Apparently, there was this immigration protest on Saturday in front of the White House. Get rid of ICE, get rid of ICE, open the borders, open the borders. And apparently this leftist was arrested outside the White House for assaulting a Secret Service agent while screaming, "Where's the president?" And supposedly they had as many as 30,000 immigration protesters out there at this protest. I think Immigration Customs Enforcement should have been in that crowd checking for, visas and green cards. Just get the buses and load them up. Because we've seen the poll numbers. Legal American citizens, for the most part, are not on board with this. Trump is out there slamming crazy Maxine Waters and predicting her ranting and raving will make people flee the Democrats, and that actually does seem to be happening. Their poll numbers are in decline, both from Maxine Waters and the immigration issue. It's triggered this new hashtag walk away, where people who were liberal Democrats, they're fed up. It's just crossed a line. It's become a caricature of itself, and they're starting to leave. So Trump is out there portraying Maxine Waters and Nancy Pelosi of being the face of the Democratic Party, and now the Democratic Party is trying to distance itself from both of them, saying, no, they don't represent the good Democrats. Yes, they're a little wacky, and probably they're off their meds here, but, they don't reflect the good Democrats. Okay. As I mentioned on that phone call here, Imran Awan pled guilty to making false statements on a loan application. Ooh, big horror crime. And then the Department of Justice has just completely shut down everything related to the IT scandal inside the United States Congress. And Tom Fitton over at Judicial Watch is out there saying that this is absolutely absurd, that there is reason for there to be a continuing investigation. And as I mentioned before, the statement issued by the Department of Justice contains a provable false statement. Whatever was going on with this IT system in Congress and Hillary's private email server and the Clinton Foundation, it's a scandal so vast, they're obviously afraid it could bring down the entire government. Look at all the overlaps, the most protected point, where all the cover-ups cover each other. You know that something is going on here. Now, Devin Nunes is out there saying that Democrats have all the blood on their hands. They completely destroyed the FBI and the Department of Justice, meaning its credibility and trustworthiness. And he's calling for 17 FBI and Department of Justice officials to testify on Capitol Hill about the FISA abuse during the 2016 presidential election. And yes, FBI lovebirds Lisa Page and Peter Strzok are among the officials Nunes is calling to testify. That should be very interesting. Now, Chairman Goodlatte is out there saying that Peter Strzok has been subpoenaed to testify publicly before Congress next Tuesday. This will be open door. We get to hear what he's going to say. And now we're hearing from his lawyer that Peter Strzok is trying to find a way out of this because he's afraid they're setting a perjury trap, meaning he knows he's perjured himself and he's about to get caught on it. This, however, is very disappointing. The U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee has effectively rubber-stamped the intelligence community assessment from January of last year that Russia interfered in the 2016 U.S. election and that Vladimir Putin personally approved it. Now, the Senate Intelligence Committee is saying they agree with it, even though they admit they did not have access to any of the underlying data. Basically, what they came on out and said is, we absolutely trust the intelligence community. We trust the CIA. The CIA would never lie to us. So they basically rubber-stamped it. Now, do you remember... Oh, we've got to take another break. Okay, we're going to take a break for some commercials. Back with more news after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And yes, once again, Republic Broadcasting does need your help to continue this fight. Just like the American revolutionaries were counting on ordinary people living in the colonies to provide us with ammunition, other supplies, to keep the fight going. Remember the old saying, for want of a nail, the kingdom was lost. So, if you can help out Republic Broadcasting, the postal address to send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity, cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Road, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. If you'd like to call in with a credit card donation or to pledge to be a recurring subscriber, that number is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours. Other times it would be extension 3. So the network thanks you. Okay, do you remember back that tarmac meeting, which is also still the subject of yet another congressional committee, and how Loretta Lynch and Bill Clinton were just saying, oh, it was just a chance here, and Bill's out there saying, I was just in my airplane, and I looked over and I saw Loretta Lynch, and I said, I'm just going to go over and say hi. We're going to talk about her grandkids here, and that was their story. And yet the timing relative to Hillary's get out of jail free card made a lot of people suspicious. Well, something that just popped out of the Inspector General's report, it wasn't a chance meeting. On page 203, it's a 500-page document, it's revealed that this so-called impromptu meeting between Bill Clinton and then Attorney General Loretta Lynch was basically set up by Clinton's Secret Service detail and the FBI. It was arranged. They needed to have a talk where there wouldn't be any reporters, wouldn't be any microphones, wouldn't be any cameras, nobody to eavesdrop and listen. Something very private was being discussed. A lot of good stuff in that IG report, even softening it up here. Okay, now Jim Jordan is basically saying that if the GOP retains control of the House, that he would like to be Speaker. And already there's a smear campaign uncorking on him. And they put out this story claiming that when he was apparently a coach, that he ignored reports of assault from the students. But it turns out the law firm handling this case is none other than Perkins Coie. Coie, the same law firm that represented Hillary Clinton's campaign and paid for the fake Russian dossier. So it's a smear job. It's an absolute smear job. Now, as you know, Supreme Court Justice Kennedy is stepping down end of this month. Donald Trump is looking to appoint a strongly conservative judge to replace him. And the Democrats are already having a cow. And the key Senate Democrats are already out there saying, we will block, we will find a way to block, we will defy the president, we are going to do that. And apparently the issue is focusing on Roe versus Wade. Now, for me, abortion is a complicated issue. I don't like it being available just as retroactive birth control for women who refuse to take the responsibility of using other forms of birth control. But I concede there are times when it is necessary to allow it to happen. Now, Planned Parenthood is out there mounting a campaign about the constitutional right to abortion. It's being echoed by feminist and pro-abortion groups all across the country. There's only one small problem. I've read the Constitution. It's not in there. It's not in there. And there are too many of these groups running around saying, well, what I want is a constitutional right. And since it's constitutional, you have to shut up. You have to stop opposing me. You have to just sit down. This is why you need to read that Constitution, so you know what the rules are. There is no constitutional right to have an abortion. The part that I really don't like about Planned Parenthood and the pro-abortionists is the arrogance in saying, well, it's not really a human being until XYZ. You don't really know. Nobody really can know. And like I said, I understand there are times when it is medically necessary. Cases of incest, or massive birth defects detected in the ultrasound. But just making it available to everybody, to all women, as a retroactive form of birth control, because they didn't want to take the pill or carry the condoms or whatever, I do have a problem with that. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here, and let's talk about the war zones, because there's a lot of wars going on all over the place. Here a war, there a war, everywhere a war, E-I-E-I-O. Getting on over to Syria, the government forces have retaken control of 27 settlements in those southern provinces, and they're using units of the Russian military police, and they're just going like gangbusters. This war is all but over, and people are starting to react to it, especially those who don't want it to be over. But it is pretty much all over. ISIS and Al-Qaeda are on the run. The jihadis are being kicked out of Syria. Assad has come to an agreement with the Kurds, so that's no longer an issue. So the only way the U.S. can stay in Syria is to fake another chemical weapons false flag attack on the Syrian people and say, well, gosh darn Assad, we have to give him what for. Apparently, Lindsey Graham is just very upset about this because he basically has flown to northern Syria, made a surprise visit to Manbij, to declare before cameras that a premature U.S. troop withdrawal would be terrible. It would be just terrible. Okay, Lindsey, here's your rifle, and here's your parachute, and here's that bright day-glow orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA's torture centers. You watch your head climbing into that transport plane, and we'll call Bashar al-Assad and tell him you are on your way to kick his butt all by yourself. But I think the rest of us, we've had enough of these wars. 18 years, going on 19 years. I think it's time that we just do a timeout on this whole situation here, because I'm not seeing anything happening in Syria that benefits the American people. I know Israel benefits. I know that pipeline companies benefit. Oil companies benefit. But there's really nothing of any real substantive value coming back to the ordinary citizens of the United States of America, who are expected to pay for all this and sacrifice our children. Now, the United Nations is claiming that Israel is getting ready to annex the West Bank. And UN official Michael Link said Israel appears to be getting closer to enacting legislation that will formally annex the West Bank, the way they annexed the Golan. This is going to cause a real problem for all those people screaming about how Russia annexed Crimea and that can't be allowed to stand. But of course, we know politicians can speak out of both sides of their mouth at the same time, and it's not stereo. But it does look like Israel is getting ready for a major aggression against the West Bank, against Gaza. They're still trying to provoke the Palestinian people. Netanyahu has apparently rescinded the rule that says Knesset politicians can't visit the Temple Mount. So now they're going on up there. That's just increasing the tension. Netanyahu is goading the Palestinians with the butterfly bullets, with the raids on Al-Aqsa Mosque. He wants Gaza to do something that he can use to just solve the Palestinian question for once and for all. Over in China, it looks like they're starting a major program of aircraft carrier construction. And the original forecast was for 4 by 2025. But now it looks like they're going up to 7. And they're going to build these 3 large aircraft carriers in addition to the Liaoning, a carrier whose frame was actually built in the former Soviet Union before being purchased and retrofitted by the Chinese. So they're arming up as well. Although I'm not sure that carriers are going to be the decisive ships in a full-on world war any more than the battleships were during World War II. Now, they're great for power projection, and China may be doing this to basically threaten Taiwan, which risks getting into a war with the United States here. Now, you've been hearing a lot about Russia's latest air defense system, the S-500 rocket, and apparently the numbers are coming out on it. They're testing it already, and it can reach an altitude of 185 kilometers. That's right at the edge of space, and has a horizontal range of 400 kilometers. So that is a very potent system here. Let's talk about the economy here a little bit. The United Nations came on out with a report about poverty in the United States. Remember, we reported yesterday that experts are saying the real level of poverty in the United States is almost 50% of the population. That the official poverty rate is based on numbers and calculations that date all the way back to the 1960s and do not take inflation into account. So the UN is out there talking about poverty in U.S., and they're blaming Donald Trump for it. It's all Donald Trump's fault. There's only one small problem. This United Nations report used data from the Obama years. So even the UN has got it in for Donald Trump, and I understand why. The United Nations sees itself as a major player in the coming world government. So they don't like the nationalist Trump any more than anybody else. All right, now, as one of our callers mentioned earlier in the program here, Donald Trump is now working to try and lure other motorcycle companies to come back to the United States and manufacture here. Not just final assembly, but manufacture everything, the whole parts chain. And so that's a good thing. And we do need to rebuild our industry. And it's going to take 30 years. It took 30 years to let it go. It's going to take 30 years to get it back. Now, down in Mexico, their new socialist president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who's often called the Mexican Hugo Chavez, is still telling Mexican citizens they should leave their towns and find a life in the United States. And he's basically saying they should flood the U.S. border, that Mexico will defend the rights of migrants all over the world, and that coming to the United States is a human right. Well, it would be one thing if he said coming to Mexico was a human right, because that's his call as president of Mexico. he has no business declaring any kind of a right regarding our country. That would be in the Constitution. And by the way, open borders is not in the Constitution any more than a right to free government taxpayer-funded abortions. But there's an interesting article out here from All News Pipeline saying the global illegal immigrant tsunami and the battle on the border proved the conspiracy theorists were right all along. And you're seeing the corporate media is now showing their true totalitarian colors. Over at InfoWars, Paul Joseph Watson was reporting where the corporate media has jumped the shark by calling everybody who supports free speech extremists. And they're back to that old canard that anybody who opposes open borders is being racist. No, we're not. Illegal is not a race. Now, there was a anti-ICE immigration protest in Philadelphia, and apparently this one turned violent. Clashes between Antifa and a right-wing conservative group happened yesterday, and ironically in the city of brotherly love. And there were a lot of arrests being made from all these people calling for the abolishment of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Now remember, polls are showing 70% of Americans want ICE to continue. They want closed borders. This is all being churned out by the liberal snowflakes, and who knows how many rent-a-mobs and how much of George Soros' money is being poured into this thing. Pat Buchanan is out there blasting this liberal stampede to abolish immigration and customs enforcement. I mean, they're out there screaming, no borders, no nations, no deportations. These are mindless slogans of an infantile left. The Democrats are desperate to flood this country with illegal immigrants before the midterm elections in November because their poll numbers are dropping with legal American citizens who are allowed to vote. So their only chance to try and hijack the Congress is to get a bunch of illegals in here, get them registered to vote, and get them to vote even though that is illegal. They're going to use the illegals to steal the Congress. Over in Hollywood, Amber Heard is out there talking about how ICE must be shut down and the borders must be open. But her concern, of course, is with the cheap illegal help, which is a common feature out in Hollywood. And Amber Heard is warning her fellow elites to protect their housekeepers, their nannies, and landscapers. And Amber Heard has just confessed to a Title VIII violation. Now, apparently, 27 European and 28 African nations have signed the Marrakesh Declaration to increase immigration to Europe. I'm having a hard time understanding how 27 European nations could sign this, looking around and seeing what the refugee crisis and mass immigration has done to their countries. But again, this sounds like something that was put together by George Soros. And I'm getting a sense that he's getting desperate, that he's pushing as hard as he can. He's spending as much money as he can. He's trying to get this thing going, to get it pushed as far forward before there's more of a pushback, before more Eurosceptic nationalist leaders get elected, before you have more countries like Italy just saying no more. He's really pushing very, very hard. Now, this next story, I have to say, have we really sunk this low? Have we really sunk to this point? Now, apparently there was this legal battle with Massachusetts state officials, and there's this school for special needs children known as the Judge Rottenberg Center. And the court ruled they have a right to use electric shock therapy on their special needs students who are acting out. Now, special needs includes within it kids who are severely autistic. So you can see the Kafkaesque quality here. The vaccines make them autistic. They have to get put in a special needs school, costs the taxpayers and the parents. And when they act out because of this vaccine-induced condition, they're given electric shocks. Now, according to the news article, the Massachusetts state authorities have been trying to end this practice since 2013. Apparently, it's been going on for a long time. But the Bristol County Probate and Family Court decided otherwise. Yes, you can use electric shocks on them. From the world of political correctness, for the first time ever, a transgender woman will compete for her country in the Miss Universe pageant. Angela Ponce has been crowned as Spain's representative, Mr. Spain. Not sure how that's going to go here. This lady had Gloria Allred, who's a high-profile feminist attorney, and they threatened lawsuits unless she was allowed to compete. He was allowed to compete, and went on. Let's see. Hang on a second. Oh, it's a second case. Angela Ponce was able to compete in the Spanish beauty pageant because Jenna Talakova of Canada won Miss Congeniality after Gloria Allred sued. Now, what's going on here? Sports events are separated by sexes because the biological reality is that men are larger and stronger on average than women. And these transgender women, they're not really women. They're not really Miss. They are the product of vast amounts of hormonal treatment that would get them kicked out of the Olympic. Lots of plastic surgery. They're crafted creations. And it's not fair to the other women in these pageants who are competing as women to have to go up against this sort of a thing. Now, if you want to have a Miss or Mr. Transgender pageant, that would be fine. But I'm going to make a prediction right now. This attempt to push LGBTQ, PFD, BSD, LSMFT, into places where people aren't comfortable with it, it's going to backfire. It's one thing when the gays and trannies said, we want you to accept us. Yeah, okay, we accept you. Fine. But when they make a point of going into bakers and threatening to sue them unless they bake gay wedding cakes, or when they go into this ridiculous thing of having men who imagine they're women compete against girls' athletics, and now this Miss Universe, that is going to have a backlash. There's going to be a public backlash on that one because they've gone too far. And people are going to be very, very upset. Now, over at Emmaus High School in Pennsylvania, for 4 days last April, students were forced to watch videos selected by the student-led gay-straight alliances. And the videos ranged from 9 questions gay people have about straight people to a compilation of clips celebrating marriage equality. There was also a video educating students about gender fluidity, selling the idea there's no such thing as male or female. And parents were very upset. One of the parents said that her son said he felt bullied by the administration for being a heterosexual man, and he felt troubled by being forced to listen to LGBT advocacy on a daily basis, and that's what it was. And now the parents want to see the video, and the school is saying, no, we can't let you see that. No, this is only for the students. We can't let the parents see that. That's a red warning sign there. Back when the Common Core people were saying, don't show this to the parents, they were telling the teachers, don't show this to the parents, is when we knew we were going to be in trouble. We'll be back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, coming up on the top of the hour, and the lovely Lady Claire. Now, over at Facebook, there was apparently another one of these videos that raised some concerns. And there was this Robert Gagnon, PhD, former associate professor at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, had his Facebook account suspended for pointing out that the video in question had nothing to do with sexual diversity, that it actually was trying to encourage prepubescent children to become homosexuals and transgenders. And Facebook banned him for hate speech. Now, again, if they want to be accepted, I don't have a problem with that. I don't have anything against gays or transgenders, but this militant LGBTQ is going to backfire. Meanwhile, Facebook did censor a country music group's patriotic song, I Stand for the Flag, which tells you how liberal Facebook has gotten. Videos encouraging little kiddies to be gay is okay. A song, I Stand for the Flag, no good. Now, this triggered a huge outcry, and Facebook rescinded the decision and re-enabled the video. But it does show the liberals have just gone off the edge of a cliff. They've jumped a shark. Okay. Let's see. Somebody just sent me an email. It's snowing in the Rocky Mountains on July 4th here. Now, a lot of news coverage is being focused on this Thai soccer team that was missing for 10 days. And the way the story is unwinding, Thai soccer team decided to go on out and do some caving. They went into this cave. There was a huge rainstorm and a flash flood, and they're trapped there. And fortunately, some rescue divers found them, and they're taking in food. And the article here is saying that they may be stuck there for months until the water all drains away. Well, maybe. How about if we teach that soccer team and the coach how to use diving gear and get them out that way? Now, there are diving masks that cover the whole face, so you don't have to worry about clamping onto the mouthpiece with the mouth, and you can even talk with them. And you get that in there, and you have a couple of divers on each side of each one of the team members. You can get them out there very, very soon. But a lot of people are getting involved here, and I'm sure there'll be a movie made out of this, like they did of that mine disaster. And apparently there are 2 doctors who have volunteered to swim into the cave and take care of the kids until they are able to be brought back out. Over in Chicago, it has been 1,221 days since Chicago had a shooting or homicide-free day. 1,221. Thank goodness they have such strict gun laws in Chicago. Just imagine how much worse it could have been. All right, we're going to take a break here for station identification. We're going to bring the lovely Lady Claire in here and get set up for hour number 3. So we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on YouTube, soon to be real video, this gorgeous creature sitting next to me, of course, is the lovely Lady Claire. And take it away.
Okay.
What do you want to talk about?
Well, you were talking about Facebook and hate speech. It did it one better. Facebook algorithm flags the Declaration of Independence as hate speech.
Are you kidding me?
I am not, no. And Max Slavo, who runs the Hits the Fan website, which I have found to be very straight and sober over the years, put this up today. And one of the things that we have seen is where the algos will put certain people's opinions way down at the bottom.
Yeah, they do that to us all the time.
And, you know, and countless examples of unpopular speech and commentary, it's seen to suppressed or outright banned. Now, apparently, while there is a human element involved in the review and flagging of information.
Yeah, the Southern Poverty Law Center and Snopes.
Yeah. They've implemented automated systems to identify potentially hateful and repulsive content. And to give you an idea of the kinds of automations in play and what words and ideas are being identified as running contrary to the principles of media aggregators and distributors, consider that Facebook recently banned the Declaration of Independence from being posted.
I mean, that is just absurd.
And
that is utterly absurd.
And do you know what they took umbrage with?
They're all commies over there, I think.
And you know what is wild? The portion of the Declaration was the enumeration of the hardships that King George had put on the American colonists.
Yeah, well...
And that was considered hate speech, you know. We had a wonderful article come up in by Terry Thessian, and he talks about what President Trump is getting ready to do.
Okay.
And we've seen him kind of look like he's taking an axe to NATO and other trading partners, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what he's actually doing, he's not taking a step back, but he's abandoning the interests of the transnational ruling class in order to develop the U.S. national economy.
Well, I mean, that's one of the reasons they hate him, because he is a nationalist.
Yeah. And a few multinational companies have given birth to a global ruling class, which gathers to congratulate itself and pat itself on the back, like in Davos. And these people are not necessarily interested in what is good for you and for me. You know, American citizens who are working every day and trying to get stuff done. And maybe not even necessarily citizens of the United States, but they use the means of the U.S. federal state to maximize their profits. And what Thessian is saying is that Donald Trump was elected on his promise to return to the earlier state of capitalism. You could call it the American dream by free market competition. Now, we could say that a reversal is impossible, but, you know, I don't know. I think it's a very bold move. What do you think, Mike?
Well, if that is in fact what he's trying to do, it's certainly a noble ambition. I'm not sure the implementation is going to go all that smoothly. I still think the trade war with China especially is ill-advised. And certainly Wall Street does not seem to think Trump is going in a good direction, because we've seen the declining stock market over the last last couple of weeks here.
Speaking of China, China has decided to change the time it starts its trade war against the U.S. to avoid striking first. And I thought this was very, very interesting. And apparently the new tariffs are going to start against China at 12:01 a.m. on Friday, when Washington is about to impose 25% tariffs on $34 billion in Chinese products.
We better buy those egg rolls tomorrow.
Oh, tell me about it. And with Beijing set to immediately respond, a logistical issue emerged. Who would get to strike first? Now, because Beijing is 12 time zones ahead of the U.S., and because China has also planned to launch retaliatory tariffs against the U.S. on Friday at midnight, it would mean that technically Beijing would start the trade war. So upon reflection and realizing that the Earth's curvature could make China appear as the aggressor, China says it would not implement tariffs ahead of the U.S. on Friday, after previous arrangements put it on a very short course.
Yes, it's that time zone thing, international dateline, and it can make things very confusing. And in this electric light age, I'm almost wondering why we need 24 time zones instead of just 4, 6 hours apart.
That makes sense.
Well, when you're emperor,
I know.
We'll do that.
And apparently, Europe has turned down a Chinese offer for a grand alliance with the U.S. We have a shout out, right?
Well, just a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining the network here. And we had a story about this just yesterday, where China was trying to approach Europe and build some economic links there. But Europe is still, unfortunately, being arm-twisted by the United States, not only to avoid Russia and avoid China, to pull out of the Iran deal. And I'd sure like to see some of Europe's leaders develop a little bit more backbone.
Yes. And, you know, with this turn down of the Chinese deal, because that would have been huge, I have a feeling that Europe collectively may rue the day when they opted out, because I think China would have made it very, very attractive for them to work together economically.
Well, this is goes back to what I was saying earlier in the show. We've let politics override everything.
Yeah.
What may be good politics in the eyes of the warmongers is bad economic policy. But the war hawks are winning out. We're going to poke at China. We're going to poke that dragon here.
And Russia and Iran. And apparently in the UK, again, a couple is critically ill in a major incident miles away from the Skripal poisoning. And they're investigating, it was a couple in their 40s. They fell critically ill from exposure to an unknown substance. Insert ominous music here. Just a few miles away from where former Russian double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter were poisoned with a suspected nerve agent in early March. Exactly 4 months ago.
Okay, well, there's been an update to this story because the later report came on out and said that this couple were playing with recreational drugs, specifically heroin and cocaine, and they overdosed. But as is usually the case with the media, we've got 2 more dead bodies or near dead bodies. Let's blame it on Russia.
No, that's not going to fly this time with that update. Thank you. And apparently the U.S. has been sidelined with regard to Iran, as 5 powers are set to give Iran new assurances. And apparently top diplomats from world powers will meet on Friday in a bid to defend their landmark nuclear deal with Iran from attack by President Donald Trump.
I guess they're getting sick of the arm twisting here.
Yeah, and apparently these guys and gals are coming from China, France, Germany, Russia, and the UK. And they're going to convene in Vienna for the first time without the U.S., let me repeat that, without the U.S., in order to ensure the continued implementation of the accord, which granted Iran a reprieve from sanctions in exchange for limits to its nuclear programs, according to a European Union statement on Wednesday. Trump abandoned the deal in May and reimposed sanctions on both Iran and companies doing business with Iran.
Okay, well, there opens up the problem.
Yeah.
Because unless these other 5 countries are willing to come on in and engage in commerce with Iran at a volume that will offset the losses from the U.S. sanctions, then it's going to fall apart because the U.S. sanctions are quite severe.
Yeah.
And we're hearing from Netanyahu and the White House. They've already formed a working group whose goal is to bring down the Iran government they did in 1953 and tried to do in...
I will have a comment on that.
You have a comment about that
later.
one.
Yeah.
So, there is that economic dimension.
Yeah.
There has to be enough money pouring into Iran to offset the losses from U.S. sanctions or the deal doesn't work.
Yeah, and a statement was made by the Austrian President Alexander van der Bellen following the meeting in the Austrian capital with his Iranian counterpart, Hassan Rouhani. The U.S. threats to impose secondary sanctions violate the rights of European countries and individuals. And these threats, Mike, are sounding old and ultimately impossible to pursue by the American government. I mean, what are they going to do? Go on the attack to all these countries who want to work with Iran and Iran itself? I mean, hello.
Well, Iran is already finding ways to evade the sanctions. In fact, a lot of countries already have. Just don't do business with the U.S. dollar. Don't go through the SWIFT system because that's the only place the sanctions actually have any force.
Yeah.
And, they could do barter deals. Where we'll give you so much of this product, you give us so much of that. There's no actual exchange of currency, therefore sanctions can't be imposed, rather. A lot of people don't know this. The music group ABBA?
Yes.
That's how they did most of their record deals, is they would send records to other countries and import products there, which would then be resold in their home country.
Okay.
And made them all quite wealthy.
Yes.
But this is going to accelerate the world moving away from the U.S. dollar.
And I mean, the BRICS countries are already doing it.
Well, anybody with a computer link and a treaty can do business across their border in their own native currencies, and that's where most of them are going. In this day and age, the idea that there has to be a global currency is obsolete.
Yeah.
It's absolutely not needed at all.
Yeah. There has been a joint op-ed, and I'm very proud of these people. It was a very prominent Israeli scientist and a translator, and this is for the English paper and blog, The Guardian. Sometimes I like some of the things they have, other times, oh no. But they're talking about the situation with the Palestinians. And they're saying, this is apartheid, guys. There is no better word for it. And they, as Jewish Israelis, are calling for BDS, and the movement is growing among mainstream Israelis. And I find that fascinating. And apparently this op-ed called the international community to intervene on behalf of Palestinians before time runs out. Now, these folks, it's the Israel Academy of Sciences and Humanities, David Harel, and the writer and translator Ilana Hammerman, gained tractions not only because of what they wrote and that they are Israeli citizens. They're not marginal guys. They're not BDS, and they're not anti-Zionists. They are established and professional mainstream careers, people, renowned in arts and science circles. And they fear that the state of Israel is facing a catastrophic situation, which could alarmingly very soon lead to extensive bloodshed.
I agree on that one. And it's like I was saying earlier in the show, Netanyahu has rescinded the rule that said members of the Knesset cannot visit the Temple Mount. There are the increasing raids into the Temple Mount by the settlers who are going on in to the mosques and conducting Jewish religious rituals. It's clearly a provocation. And especially with this upcoming trial for corruption, Netanyahu needs a good war. And he may just have decided it's time to deal with the Palestinian question once and for all. The UN is saying it looks like Israel is going to try and annex the entire West Bank. Yeah, I saw that as well. And I think that this gentleman and this lady are very brave people whose work in this direction needs very much to be commended. But they are working against a wretchedly apartheid, self-proclaimed theocracy with nuclear weapons. And I am hoping and praying, as a Christian, as I mentioned to our listeners and readers, I'm a Methodist, that peaceful progress could possibly happen. Unfortunately for me, and in my perspective, Mike, here's the deal. Israel does not want peace. It wants territory, and by any means necessary. It wants Eretz Israel. Yeah. And I think that the next couple of months will be momentous in terms of seeing what actually transpires. I wish I had a better sense for the evolution of a potential deal for peace, but I do not see anything that is going to give Palestinians satisfaction for giving up the right of return. Now, this big plan that Jared Kushner has, it's a non-starter. Yeah. You know, and the reason that Trump cut off funds to the PA, the reason they pressured Australia to cut off funds to the PA, and I imagine other countries, is basically an arm twist to get Palestine to go along with this deal, which is all in favor of Israel. There's nothing in it for the Palestinian people. And in a way, they're trying to starve those people into submission, like they're also doing down in Yemen. Yes. A little event happened in Iraq. And I thought it was noteworthy, especially because of the political battle and the recount going on there. Apparently, Iraq has expanded an air base near the borders of Syria, and they are likely to fill that base with more U.S. troops. Now, that seemed a little weird. Apparently, they're expanding this air base in Anbar province, and it was a senior Iraqi army officer who was quoted saying on Tuesday, adding that the expansion is likely to receive U.S. troops. Speaking to the London-based Al-Arabi Al-Jadid newspaper, the office said construction works as well as expansion at Ain al-Assad base have started on an area of several kilometers, and the expansion included the northern and western parts of the airbase. And it will take shape under strict security measures. Now, the officer did not clarify the real reasons for the expansion, but he said it's more likely to receive troops in the base located in the desert region, which still has havens of Islamic State members. Well, I'm going to take a guess here and say that the U.S. knows that barring another false flag, that they are going to get kicked out of Syria real soon. Turkey has become unreliable.
Yeah.
And the U.S. has been using bases in Turkey and Israel. And if they want to project power more toward Iran, they need a new power projection point, and I think that's what this is being set up for.
I think you're right, but I've got to wonder, Mike, in the recount, which is against, between al-Awlaki and Muqtada al-Sadr's bloc. Now, if after the recount, al-Sadr's bloc is still deemed in power, just how are he and his loyalists going to take the memo about potentially more American troops being placed in Iraq?
They're not going to take it very well, but you need to remember that the three leading parties in the election, which included Muqtada al-Sadr's party, they had already agreed to form a coalition government. They're going to put aside their differences. So there's going to be a new government in Iraq that is not beholden to the United States of America. So I don't know, is the U.S. getting ready for a fourth Iraq war?
Lord, I hope not. You know, we've been in there since, what is it, April of 2003?
Oh, no, go all the way back to Desert Storm.
Oh, yeah.
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 You know, and the incubator story.
Oh, yes.
Oh, they left the babies on the floor. Why didn't the nurses pick them up?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And apparently a former U.S. envoy to Moscow calls that intelligence report, which you talked about earlier, completely politically motivated.
Of course it's politically motivated.
I mean, come on, guys.
The Intelligence Committee came on out and admitted they hadn't actually seen the underlying data and information. They're just willing to take the word of the CIA, the sweetest smelling spies in the world.
But taking the word is not doing the forensic work.
No, it isn't.
On the data that was presented. And unless you have that, Mike, you've got nothing. You've got nothing.
No, it's propaganda. It is pure propaganda. And they're hoping that the American people have been dumbed down so much that we'll look at those little TV sets and say, okay, Russia rigged the election. Okay, give me a beer. Happy 4th of July. No, it's reach and repetition. They're going to go on saying Russia tampered with the 2016 election over and over and over and over again until you throw up your hands in despair and say, all right, Russia rigged the election. Stop hurting my ears.
Yeah. And in my world, looking at this, the whole report was an attempt at misdirection to ensure that what happened with the Clinton Foundation and pay to play never really got the public documentation it needed.
I mean, look, they openly admitted they rigged the primaries against Bernie Sanders. You know, why aren't they looking at that? Well, no, we've got Russian interference. And again, it's hypocritical in the extreme when you look at how many elections the U.S. tampers with all around the world on a regular basis.
Oh, it's a 24/7 business.
Anyway, we got to take a break for commercials.
Gotcha.
And we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And Lady Claire, what is your next story?
Well, I'd like to bop back over to Israel, and apparently some MKs, members of the Knesset, interrupted a Children Under Occupation conference. Now, I'm beginning to see a change in the attitude and the thinking of Israelis, because apparently these were four very right-wing lawmakers. They got removed from a Knesset auditorium after disrupting a controversial conference organized by left-wing parties. And one of the guys who got ejected said, which low are you ready to stoop to bring the enemy into our home? That was Likud, member of the Knesset, Oren Hazan.
And, of course, Likud is Netanyahu's party.
Yes. The Children Under Occupation conference was hosted by the Knesset on Monday, and it has caused a real outcry, which culminated in four Knesset members interrupting those speaking, and they got kicked out by security guards. It was the first of its kind conference and was initiated by left-wing parties to discuss Israeli-Palestinian conflicts, ramifications on children living in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem.
Well, I can give you the ramifications in Gaza. That's the butterfly bullets.
Yeah. And it appears that the Israeli left actually is getting how horrific the optics are of children being tortured and killed to produce confessions, and fears that the BDS movement is going to get stronger, which it inevitably will, as more images from Gaza emerge on a daily basis, like some that I put up, showing IDF members shooting at and wounding women and children.
Yeah, there was a women's protest last Friday.
Yeah.
Somebody may have thought that the IDF might not go so hard on them. No, just shot them all.
Yeah.
Remember that IDF T-shirt they had a few years ago?
One shot, two kills.
Oh,
yeah. Lord.
Boy, talk about a mindset.
Yeah. And they used live fire on these Palestinian women who demonstrated along the heavily fortified fence with Israel in Gaza Strip. Ashaf al-Qadra, spokesperson for Gaza's health ministry, said yesterday that media representatives covering the event, and they were very clearly marked as press, were also among those who were injured at the scene east of the enclave.
Israel's trying to stop that flood of images coming out from Gaza, and they have been targeting journalists.
Yeah. And Palestinians in the Strip have taken part in the protests dubbed the Great March of Return, calling for the right of return to the homes from which they were expelled in 1948 during the Nakba, where more than 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their towns and villages. Wow. You know, I've got to think, Mike, this action takes the IDF's manly man Butch Act to a whole new level of low. Shooting and wounding women and children?
Shooting and killing women and children.
Yikes.
I see a little bit of Ron White there.
Yeah,
You got to be a real manly man.
Yeah, yeah.
Blow off the head of a kid with an exploding bullet.
Yeah, it's just really, really bad. And, I was going to get to this. There is now a working Israeli-U.S. committee to regime change Iran. And there were some economic protests, and they turned into widespread anti-regime protests, engulfing some 75 mostly provincial cities and towns across Iran in late December and into January. And the State Department was selling this and spinning it as pro-revolutionary rhetoric, calling for elements inside of Iran to lead a transition in government. And that's what Heather Nauer's own words said.
This is 2009 all over again.
God,
the United States has never forgiven Iran for breaking free from the empire back in 1979.
Right.
And they tried to bring down Ahmadinejad with the exact same thing in 2009.
Yep.
And they failed miserably because the people of Iran now understand.
Yeah.
This is all bought and paid for. The agent provocateurs are out there.
Yep.
And they realize it's not real. It's not organic. It's not a true grassroots rejection of the government.
Right. And there has been a high-level joint U.S.-Israeli working group meeting for months with just this goal in mind, as Axios confirms in a new bombshell report. Israel and the United States formed a joint working group a few months back that is focused on internal efforts to encourage protests with Iran and pressure the country's government.
So it is another color revolution. It's a replay of 2009.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know about you, but it's not a very good image of the United States.
No.
That we go into other people's countries and we mess around with their governments and we regime change them. And this is the reason the world hates the United States.
Yeah.
They don't hate us for our freedoms. Everybody loves to be free. They hate us because we have this our government has this bad habit of going on into other people's countries, changing the government over, and then plunging that country into poverty in order to serve multinational corporations.
Yeah.
And the U.S. has done it roughly 50 times since the end of World War II.
Wow.
And as is the case in Iran, they're batting 500. They succeed about half the time.
Yeah.
All right, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before I turn the microphone back over to Claire here, just something we saw on the TV during the commercial break. Apparently, as part of the anti-ICE protests, this woman has climbed onto the Statue of Liberty and is refusing to come down. And screaming about immigration. We used to be a land of immigration. There are two problems with that. First of all, even in the heyday of immigration, alongside the Statue of Liberty, there was Ellis Island. It wasn't uncontrolled. People had to come in with papers. They had to have a health check. And those who were not considered useful to the country were sent back. The second thing is she had better be very careful where she's going, because that copper cladding on the Statue of Liberty is very thin and very old. She could punch through. probably serve her right if it did. Anyway, what's your next story here?
Well, I kind of wanted to go back to this Israeli-U.S. working group on regime change in Tehran. And I have to tell you, Mike, for me, this is geopolitical hubris on an order of magnitude that amazes even me. And you know that's rare. And the reason I say this is that there are too many countries who are all too ready to do business with Iran for its oil, sidestepping U.S. sanctions and avoiding the U.S. dollar altogether. And these countries include China, India, and Turkey. And in fact, the Trump administration has had to soften its stance on this demand. Now, apparently, it was to have been that no countries on the planet were to have been buying Iranian oil imports. And there's a very curious date by which these countries are supposed to supply or stop being supplied by Iran, and that's November 4th.
It's 2 days ahead of the election.
Yeah, I know. So one has to wonder if there will be another blustery or else from the White House against these countries, or is this a date for a go, no-go decision to be made on a military attack against Iran if the current protests are unsuccessful at achieving the regime change in Tehran wanted by the government and U.S. And the Israeli government? What do you think?
Well, yeah, I think they're going to try and go for a regime change, and if it fails like it did in 2009, I think they're just going to haul off an attack. Because Netanyahu has wanted to break up Iran the way Iraq was broken up. Trump and Kushner and Sheldon Adelson are fully on board with that, just attacking this country that has never attacked us. And again, I know Americans, especially on this day, don't like to hear this, but we're the bad guys this time out in this world war. We're the aggressors.
Yeah. It would be a bold step to attempt to regime change Iran on 2 days before the midterms, but
I don't. There's something else going on with that November 4th date, because the regime change attempt has been happening for months, and I know, interestingly enough, this article said that joint U.S.-Israeli task force to bring down the Iranian government started just about the time this all began.
Yeah.
So if they're not able to do it, if the sanctions and the manufactured protests don't do it, and it didn't work in 2009, then I would say that the decision to attack Iran will probably come a lot sooner than November. And in fact, I think it's going to happen very, very quickly, because the wars are vote losers right now in this election cycle. And the GOP is understanding the Liberal Democrats are self-destructing. They've jumped the shark with Maxine Waters and accosting people, and this, trying to convince little kids that they should be homosexual and transsexual. That's turning people off. It's started this walk-away movement. And the GOP has to know, if they escalate the wars, they're going to lose that advantage they've got now. The poll numbers will swing back the other way, even though the Democrats are proving to be just as bloodthirsty as the Republicans are right now. We have a caller on the line here, Mateus in Canada. And Mateus, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
And the top of the day to you both.
Thank you.
Hey, I wanted to bring up a topic of artificial intelligence, but I waited until both of you are there because I think your wife might have a more sympathetic ear to this idea than you would. So we're all talking about when are the computers going to become self-conscious, and personally, I think that's never going to happen, but it's important to understand the root assumptions of any debate. And so it all comes down to, at the root of it, do you believe that consciousness is just a byproduct of chemical reactions inside the brain, which you would believe, Michael, and then your wife would believe that you would conclude, good point, your wife would believe, there, are you happy? She would believe that consciousness is a pre-existing condition before the existence of a human brain, and that the brain is a consequence of the pre-existing intelligence inherent in the universe because the universe has a spiritual component and the physical world is a manifestation of the spiritual reality. Okay, so basically when it comes to the question of will computers ever become self-conscious, you just have to understand what camp you're in. If you believe in the spiritual top-down intelligence, then you're going to say, no, the computers can never have that because that's a non-physical spiritual component. And if you believe in the traditional method, then you will. And then the thing about that is that we're being taught in school, and our children are being taught the whole Big Bang Theory, which I know, Mike, you don't believe in, and I don't either.
I have concluded. Please stop using that word.
You concluded.
Yes.
And most people conclude the same thing. But what most people are not realizing that means that they're also saying that they don't have any free will. Because if a person subscribes to the Big Bang Theory and denies the spiritual element of I amness, of consciousness, of the witness, of the presence, of the observer, of the spiritual presence, and all we are is just an explosion that took place a long time ago, and everything's just math, then that means that everything you do is predestined by an explosion. And most people just really get it on a deep level. That's not true. You can feel your self-determination.
Okay, Mateus, I'm going to interrupt here for a couple of reasons. First of all, this is so wildly off topic of where we are. I'm wondering why you just felt this sudden urge to call in on the topic. Now, I don't know what Claire's opinions are regarding the pre-existence of a consciousness that predates the existence of the body in which it resides. First of all, you're talking about self-awareness, not self-consciousness. Self-consciousness is like when somebody walks into the bathroom and you're naked, okay? But self-awareness, it's hard to say whether computers are going to achieve it or not because we don't know what it is in ourselves. We don't know how we are self-aware. We don't know how we are conscious. And it may be that it is simply an artifact of all the processing, and that at a certain level, computers will be self-aware, but it may be so alien to us that we won't recognize it for what it is.
Well, Claire, obviously you believe in intelligence before the human brain because that's God. But do you think that computers can ever have the same kind of self-awareness? Like being aware of yourself.
I don't think it is impossible. It is a question of the evolution of the technology and also what is happening to humankind as it becomes more spiritually and self-aware. So there's going to be a symbiosis, I think.
Well, that was we had a caller who called in on that subject about an eventual merging, which is going to be very, very difficult for reasons of organic biology. But getting on back to the Big Bang, even though there's a Big Bang, there's still a great deal of randomness in the universe, chance, things that just happen. I mean, even looking at the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, just by looking at something, you alter its reality. And so I don't think it's all preordained and predestined. It is all evolved, and it will continue to evolve. But it's kind of weird that one of the axioms of the world of physics is that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed. This was coming on out of Einstein's work.
Yes.
And yet at the same time, the people who support the theory of the Big Bang are saying that first there was nothing, and then there was all this energy and matter. And the reason we get away with it is in that first few moments, the rules of the physics universe didn't apply. In other words, magic happened. So it's a very weak argument. The fact of the matter is that the Big Bang theory should have been discarded as soon as special relativity came along. But it's very popular among, the religious people. They want to believe that we were sneezed into existence by a mighty God and that he sits up nights to admire us. Anyway, Mateus, we're running short on time. I'm going to let you go, and we're going to switch over to George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Happy 4th of July.
Happy
And to
Independence
you.
Day.
Yeah, anyway, I would like to, people are saying we should get rid of ICE. Well, if they're going to draft the bill that, don't we think we should have add a list of a few of the agencies that to go along with ICE? You know, like the TSA, Homeland Security, the National Endowment of the Arts, the Food and Drug Administration, all them agencies that sort of like, that are more abusive than ICE, that really do rip up families. Also add the EPA to that too.
Yes.
You know, if you want to go with ICE, we can add a few more agencies to the list.
Well, they're going to get nowhere with the protests. They're just out there being liberal whiners and criers yet again. And I predict that the vast majority of these people showing up at these protests are in this country illegally, which is why I said earlier in the show, Immigration and Customs Enforcement should just go down there with a bunch of buses and start loading them up. And what these illegal immigrants are trying to do is riot their way into permission to stay here.
And break the system in the process.
Yeah, and they are breaking the system.
Well, the thing is, I bring this up all the time. People don't seem to get it, but, I know we complained, and we're appearing, when they passed the Military Commissions Act, the John Ward Defense Authorization Act, PD 51, also the Insurrection Act, especially like with California really going rogue with a lot of laws, and, it really got borders on it might be a threat to the national security of the rest of the nation. I don't want to see the president have to order federal troops to go take over Sacramento to sort of like get the state back under law and order, because everything is such disorder. I'm really worried about that, but especially with immigration too.
Well, again, the Democrats are pushing for this open borders because they're sinking in the polls. The immigration issue itself is working against them. The extremism that we're seeing in the streets is working against them. I think these riots and protests are going to work against them. But they are desperate to bring in illegal immigrants and get them registered to vote for the November elections. There are Democratic Party leaders who have openly said they're dependent on the illegal immigrant vote to hang on to power, even though it is illegal for non-citizens to vote in this country. But they're completely they're completely violating the law, and they don't care, and they don't care who sees them do it.
Well, they ain't got enough dead people to vote anymore. I mean, I really think the veterans of the Spanish-American War withdraw their endorsement. So, all right, thank you, Mike. Have a nice holiday.
Thank you very much. Yeah, as soon as the show is over, we're going to be on vacation mode, which means I got lots of laundry to do. All right, James in Ohio. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I wanted to talk about artificial intelligence. I tried to call in when you had that guest on, but I was too late. I was discussing with a friend how we get to a conscious and independent, life form, but that also includes electronics. And my idea was, since, they did some unfortunate experiments where they cultured rat neurons, and it's connected to a plotter, and it controls a pen, and the way the neurons interact with it is they create drawings. I'm sure they have no idea what they're doing, but they're interacting with this chip.
Yes.
My idea was to take, do you know what a tardigrade is? A water bear?
Yes.
Microorganism, because it's not an extremophile, but it can withstand a vacuum and come back to life later, or being dried out. It doesn't require a circulatory system. My idea was to genetically knock out enough genes in the tardigrade to where it only produced a nervous system in the generative cell, and to culture a large amount of these and teach them to operate as like parallel processors and to interact with electronics in order to receive food. And since they live more than a year, and a lot of them generate parthenogenically without, asexual reproduction, I think that actually someday could be worked out, and the food could be provided. The digestive system could be replaced by a microbe.
And boy, I thought I was having problems maintaining Windows 10.
Yeah.
That would be a real headache here. Let me back up a little bit. We're almost out of time in this segment. Everyone likes to talk about massive parallelism. It's never really worked on out because it has to do with what's called the granularity of the task versus the granularity of the machine. There are some things that massive parallel computers do really well, like finite element analysis or Mandelbrot's. They do really good Mandelbrot's. And many years ago, I got to work with a connection machine. I got to program it. And I realized that for a lot of the sort of tasks we were doing, which was computer animation and ray tracing, it was actually a very inappropriate machine because it was spending all of its time shipping data around rather than actually working on it. Something that has plagued a lot of systems, but definitely on massive parallel processors. Now, that being said, again, I don't know about you, I don't feel like I want to get plugged into a computer anytime soon. Until we got something better than Windows 10. But these experiments are interesting. But if you look at how knowledge is distributed inside the human brain, it's not going to be just one or two contact points. Anyway, we got to let you go. Got to do a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment on this 4th of July, Independence Day. And Claire, you had one more story you wanted to get on out.
Yes, I did. Apparently, there has been another Saudi coalition wedding slaughter in Yemen. Just the latest, the coalition has illegally treated all of Saada as a military target for 3 years, and it has routinely struck civilian targets ever since the assistance of the U.S. enables attacks like this one. And it's not made coalition attacks any less likely to hit civilian targets. By providing the coalition with unconditional backing for its campaign and refusing to criticize them for their war crimes, the U.S. makes attacks on Yemeni civilians a certainty.
Absolutely. Well, somebody there obviously hates the idea of weddings because they've shot up so many of them.
There is no excuse, Mike, for providing weapons and fuel.
It's a terror campaign.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's a terror campaign.
And as long as I have breath, I am going to peacefully, logically, and clearly witness to the U.S. enabling of Saudi war crimes in Yemen. It just shouldn't be happening, Mike.
No, it shouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
Especially the children.
Oh, Lord.
Especially the children.
When I look at those images, these kids to me are not expendable. They're not collateral damage. They are innocent civilians who have had the most horrifically bad luck to be at the absolute wrong place at the absolutely wrong time for something in which they have no participation whatsoever.
Yeah,
it's a slaughter.
These kids haven't attacked us. It's another massacre, like we're seeing down in Gaza. And the part that really worries me is it's like the whole world is becoming numbed to the horror of these U.S. and Israeli wars, which means the horror is only going to escalate.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to stop the politics here. Again, it's Independence Day, and I hope in hour number 1 I gave you some things to think about regarding our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. And if you have never read them, you do need to do that. The other thing we would like to say, of course, is that for those of you who are lucky enough to be allowed to have fireworks, please be very careful. And I know that most of the fireworks sold are considered safe and sane, low power, but I do know there are the illegals out there, which can be very powerful, quarter stick of dynamite. And as a matter of fact, on the main page of whatreallyhappened.com, we have this article about this NFL player who almost lost his career when a firework that he was playing with 3 years ago went off in his hand. So have a fire extinguisher nearby, keep everybody back away, and be safe and sane. I mean, I love fireworks. We're not allowed to have them here in Hawaii anymore. We get the little party poppers, and we can't even have those here in the condo complex.
Right.
Because they don't want to pick up the little strings and everything.
No.
So, enjoy your 4th of July holiday, your barbecues, your fireworks shows, and meanwhile, stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got a lot of things to share with you tonight. please take what you learn here from this radio show and from the website and share them with everybody that you know. Email, phone calls, face-to-face, bring back the art of conversation here. Just get it on out there. Ignore the social media. It's just been totally compromised and filtered, and anybody trying to get the truth out about what's going on in this country is being blocked. So have a good 4th of July. We'll be back tomorrow, and aloha, America.